I love villains. I love seeing a villain cause absolute chaos. I love seeing them push our heroes to their breaking point. A while back, I made a video breaking down the thematic roles of the villains in some of my favorite movies, the Gore Verbinski Pirates of the Caribbean films, discussing their roles as narrative foils for each of our three protagonists: Barbossa for Jack Sparrow, Davy Jones for Will Turner, and Cutler Beckett for Elizabeth Swann. And while I had a ton of fun making that video, I do think I only scratched the surface when it comes to how those characters would have been created by the writers. So today, I'll be focusing on the thematic and narrative role of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and At World's End. Here's the thing though, the only way to break this down is by reverse engineering these movies. So we already have some form of a framework from the previous film. Love and loyalty versus hatred and betrayal are already existing themes here. From everything I know of the production of these movies, the team started working on Dead Man's Chest and At World's End as a larger project, basically right after the release of Curse the Black Pearl, and they went in with a much cleaner slate of what they needed to make happen. The first movie already used most of the iconography and aesthetic from the ride, and key characters like Davy Jones had different design iterations that eventually had narrative consequences, going from a skeleton from the bottom of the ocean to an octopus-bearded sea devil. Of course, these changes caused a shift in how the story would go, using supernatural elements like the Kraken and the sea goddess Calypso. So this film uses a pretty solid way of establishing a new cast, contrasting one character dynamic with another. But given that there's already three main heroes in these movies, there needs to be some connection to Jack, ideally one that could kickstart the plot. Well, here's a pretty cool idea. We don't really know his history outside of his experiences with Barbossa. Why not explain his history with the Black Pearl? Jack explains how his love of the Black Pearl comes from the freedom it grants.
But what a ship is, what the Black Pearl really is freedom.
So what better way to explore Jack's love of freedom through his ship by showing a captain who uses his ship for the opposite purpose: a prison. Everything to do with Davy Jones is intrinsically tied to oppression. He enslaves sailors on his ship while also being a prisoner in his own right. Famously, Davy Jones was once in love with the sea goddess Calypso in what was implied to be a twisted and possessive love, where he was tasked with ferrying souls to the next world for 10 years, but was able to return to land for a single day afterwards. After the first 10 years, he finally went ashore, and Calypso was nowhere to be seen. He ended up showing the First Brethren Court of Pirate Lords how to bind Calypso in human form. And in his grief, he carved out his own heart, but not before placing a curse upon it. Whoever stabs the heart must take his place. Since that day, countless years before the events of the films, Jones became cursed and twisted, becoming a terror of the deep. With this backstory, we find ourselves with another way Jones could serve a thematic role in the story, through being a parallel with Will Turner. Will Turner is all about honor, love, and self-sacrifice. He's a blacksmith turned hero, driven by loyalty and a strong moral compass, even if it leads him into dangerous waters. Jones is the ultimate heartless man, literally and emotionally. Jones cut out his own heart, the very symbol of love, empathy, and humanity, because he couldn't bear the pain of betrayal. But instead of dealing with that grief, he externalized it and became monstrous. Will's journey is all about holding on to love and finding strength in his bonds, overcoming issues in a relationship and understanding the bigger picture, while Jones's arc is all about what happens when he refuses to heal. He becomes the cautionary tale for Will. By At World's End, the contrast is complete. Will accepts the role of the Dutchman captain, not out of bitterness, but out of responsibility. He retains his heart, thematically of course, so the Dutchman returns to its original purpose of ferrying souls. In a sense, it's the redemption of the role Jones defiled. The literal and symbolic importance of the heart cannot be overstated in these films. Davy Jones's heart, locked away in a chest and buried to protect his vulnerability, becomes the object of power, desire, and manipulation. Jones, having removed his heart, becomes unfeeling and monstrous, not just physically, but emotionally. His rage, his cruelty, and his detachment are the consequences of letting your negative emotions get the best of you. Meanwhile, Will is defined by his emotional core. He is always motivated by his feelings, his love for Elizabeth, his longing to understand his father, and later, his need to protect both of them. Now, when you really sit with this contrast, it becomes clear how intentional this is. Davy Jones isn't just some cool-looking sea monster antagonist. He's the embodiment of what Will Turner could become if he gave into his despair. He's the mirror image of Will, showing what happens when you sacrifice your heart, not in a noble sense, but in the sense of rejecting love and vulnerability to avoid pain. Jones represents avoidance, emotional cowardice. He's the easy road that leads to ruin. That's why, narratively, it makes perfect sense for Will to be the one to stab Davy Jones's heart. He confronts the possible future, but chooses not to become it. He takes the burden, but does so from a place of love. That one act closes the loop of their thematic parallel. And that's really the brilliance of how Davy Jones functions. He's not just a villain because he does bad things. He means something. Every moment he's on screen is a warning to the audience and the other characters. His cruelty is informed by pain, his power is rooted in fear, and his fate is a narrative inevitability. Once he removed his heart and locked it away, his death was basically set in stone. Because in the world of these films, to be heartless is to be doomed. It doesn't matter how powerful you become or how many souls you collect. If you can't feel, you've already lost. So let's talk about his ties to the larger story, especially Jack's arc. Jack Sparrow is obsessed with freedom, sure. But in Dead Man's Chest, we see that his love of freedom is really fear in disguise. He's afraid of death, of being controlled, of being tied down to anything. That's what makes the reveal that he owes Davy Jones a debt so thematically rich. Jack is a man trying to outrun his own consequences, and Davy Jones is literally a consequence made flesh. When you make a deal with him, you will pay, sooner or later. Jones is what's waiting at the end of the road for anyone who tries to cheat fate or love or death. So naturally, he's the one Jack ends up having to confront. And let's not forget how Jones's power structure works. The Kraken, the Dutchman, the heart and the chest, it's all built around fear and control. Everyone is enslaved by something. Jones commands through terror, not loyalty. It's antithetical to Jack's idea of leadership, which is unorthodox, but at least free. That's the reason Jack has to confront Jones, not just because he owes a debt, but because Jones's entire existence is an insult to Jack's worldview. Jones is the total opposite of freedom. He's trapped in his own cycle, his own bitterness, his own curse, eventually even being trapped under Beckett. And in the end, Jack defeats him, not just by helping Will stab the heart, but by recognizing the need to let go of selfishness. That's why he gives Will the chance to stab the heart. You could even say that Davy Jones enables the growth of both Will and Jack, precisely because of how complete and total his own failure is. He's like a ghost of the future, a warning, a test. And when you frame him that way, you realize he's one of the most well-written villains in blockbuster film history. He looks terrifying, he sounds terrifying, but what makes him really scary is what he represents. He's grief that curdled into hate. His love turned to poison. He's the price you pay for refusing to heal. And it's not just that his character is emotionally resonant. He's also narratively functional in 1,000 different ways. He drives the plot forward by inciting the conflict. Jack's debt leads directly to the Kraken chasing the Black Pearl. Will's pursuit of Jones's heart ties to his father's fate aboard the Dutchman. Elizabeth's manipulation of Jack and Norrington also hinges on Jones's threat looming over everyone. And Cutler Beckett, he only gets to rise to power in Outworld's End because he gains control over Davy Jones. So Davy Jones isn't just a thematic powerhouse, he's the narrative linchpin of the entire trilogy's second and third acts. Even his music tells a story. That haunting organ theme, melancholic and grand, is one of the best character motifs Hans Zimmer has ever written. It doesn't scream evil, it weeps. It cries in sorrow and loneliness, because Jones isn't a villain who enjoys what he does. He's a villain who needs to do what he does to survive. He's trapped in a loop of punishment and pain, and he punishes others because he doesn't know how to stop punishing himself. In fact, it's worth noting that even his crew reflects the idea. The men aboard the Flying Dutchman slowly lose their humanity, becoming fused with the sea and its creatures. They rot and warp and dissolve into monsters. But it's not instantaneous, it's gradual. That implies that at some point, there was still a choice. They were too scared of death, to the point they gave up their lives for something far worse than death, losing sight of what actually matters. The longer you stay in service, the more you lose yourself. That makes the Dutchman a metaphor for grief and destruction. The longer you let it consume you, the less of yourself remains. The writers were clearly interested in a theme that runs deep through both sequels. What happens when you run from pain, love, and responsibility? Jones is the embodiment of what happens when you give in to that fear. Jack flirts with this too. He spends Dead Man's Chest trying to run from his debt, and, by extension, death. But unlike Jones, Jack never gives up his soul. Will goes the opposite way, towards pain and responsibility. Davy Jones and Calypso's doomed romance serves as a foil for Will and Elizabeth's enduring love. showing what happens when betrayal is allowed to fester instead of being overcome. Jones himself embodies the major themes of Pirates of the Caribbean: betrayal, fate, and the inevitability of death. His downfall isn't just a cautionary tale for Will, it's a warning for everyone who tries to outrun their fate. It only makes sense for Will and Jack to be the ones to kill Jones, as he was representative of everything they could have become.
A woman, he fell in love.
No. I heard it was the sea he fell in love with.
Same story, different versions, and all are true.
When men try to control forces beyond themselves, it serves as their own destruction. Confronting things with courage is the only way to live. But I'll be covering that in more depth in another video. But in the end, Davy Jones's tragedy makes the victories of Will, Elizabeth, and Jack all the more meaningful, because unlike him, they learn, they grow, and they refuse to let fate turn them into monsters. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. Join my Discord server, become a channel member, and subscribe if you so please. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.